Hello there and welcome back for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and this week, we're globetrotting. Hello there, I'm Rafael Di Furia, back at it again for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. This week, because I actually had to do some traveling for some meetings, I wanted to do an episode about actually how to get around Portugal. Before all of that, and actually before traveling around Portugal, I think it might be worthwhile talking about how to get to Portugal. But just something I will quickly mention, I recorded this episode on a moving train and I'm so mad. I got back, started editing, and the audio file was completely silent, so I'm doing this with voiceover. Anyway, let's talk about getting to the country, this beautiful country called Portugal. If you're coming from the US, most of the options that you'll have to get here will probably either come through Lisbon or Porto. Depending on where you're trying to get into the country and what towns and cities and this and that you're trying to visit, one airport may make sense over the other. There's also another international airport called Faro, F-A-R-O, down in the Algarve. And that's an airport that usually is a bit more served by Europe. So that's going to be one if you're traveling around Europe and you're specifically going to the Algarve, you may want to consider that. But if you're trying to get to the north of the country, generally speaking, like for example, if you're interested in Porto or Braga or Matosinhos or anywhere up in the north, then you would want to consider the Porto airport. But if you're going to go anywhere around the center of the country, you may want to consider Lisbon. But I would also say that actually, depending on where you're flying from, the Lisbon airport can sometimes be a little bit less expensive. And if you're traveling all the way out to Portugal anyway, you may want to consider having the ability to see some different places. So you could actually use Lisbon as a jump-off point to get to the Algarve or to the north. Even, for example, if you want to travel from Lisbon up to Braga, that would be a 3.5-hour train, or you could take a bus. Or, for example, even if you wanted to go to the Algarve, you go to Portimão or Lagos, L-A-G-O-S, or P-O-R-T-I-M-A-O, with the little tilde over the A. And these are going to be some places that are very easily accessible by bus. But of course, if you are planning on really staying in the north, the most convenient really will be the Porto airport, just because from Porto to Braga, for example, you're going to have like maybe 40, 50 minutes by car, maybe 30 minutes if you're driving a little fast and there's no traffic, or even the train from Porto, for example, the slow train would be maybe 50 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, depending on the train specifically. But you could also get a faster train, which may take 30 or 40 minutes, or you can get a private transfer from one to the other. But for those of you who may be a little bit more adventurous and want to add on a little bit more to your time out here in Iberia, and I'm saying Iberia because the other airport that I might consider in a pinch, or if I were looking to have a unique experience, the airport that I might consider in that case, if I were looking for that adventure, might actually be someplace like Madrid, for example. You can have a couple fun days there. It's a city that I know I enjoy, as well as many other people from around the world. But what you can do, at least during normal times when there aren't restrictions, there are some overnight trains that you can take directly from Madrid to Lisbon. And so you have a fun little experience. And for example, you can have your own private cabin where you have a bed all to yourself, or you can have a cabin where you can actually share it with someone else, kind of bunk bed style, somebody else that you are traveling with, of course. And so you're getting transportation plus like a night in a hotel covered in one ticket. And then if you wake up early enough in the morning, you can catch kind of the sunrise time. You won't necessarily be facing towards the sun and actually properly get the full view, but you'll start to see the world kind of coming to life in the countryside and actually be able to sit in a carriage in the train that has seating, and you can have breakfast and have just a nice experience. It's a very unique experience if you've never done that before. It's more of an adventurous kind of thing. It's not necessarily a 5-star experience. The beds aren't the softest, but it's not a horrible experience. And that, of course, will take you from Madrid to Lisbon. And again, from Lisbon, you can use that as a hop off point to get north or to get south. Lisbon is super easy to get to really anywhere that you need to in the country. Great little hub. And even again, to get to the south, again, just a few hours. We're not talking about a huge amount of time that even if you wanted to travel from the tip of the south to the tip of the north, it's not that massive. Even in comparison to a country like Italy, it's a much smaller country. Even if you compare it to a state like Texas in the States, it is significantly smaller than Texas as well. But you're here in the country. How do you get around? What do you need to do? Of course, there are going to be a lot of people who think maybe that they want to rent a car while they're here. I would say if you're going to be in the cities, having a car could be probably very annoying. I know I personally would not want to have one, but then again, I'm the type of person who just doesn't drive to begin with. That's a very conscious choice that I made, not because of any particular reasons other than that I just want to have a chilled, laid back life without having to think about a car. But in some of these small European cities, finding parking can be very difficult. Driving can be a little bit on the tricky side. And also when you're trying to navigate and figure, do I go down this little small street or that little small street, even with navigation, and even especially like in some of these places where there are these very small streets, navigation, GPS navigation may be a little bit spotty from time to time. So personally, I would recommend if you are going to be in the cities, take taxis or Ubers or Bolts, whatever it may be. And if you're in specifically Lisbon or Porto, you also have buses and metros. I mean, a lot of cities in the country, you already have buses anyway, but you also have metros there. And the metro system, I can say in Lisbon, is really quite easy to get around with. It's not as vast and as complicated as a lot of others. And even Porto as well is also not so complicated. But if you're planning on going to smaller towns and you want to get out to some villages, like for example, if you go down to the Algarve, there's a great little mountain village called Monchique. They have some of the cleanest, most delicious water there that just comes from the mountain. And so that's one thing that you may want to consider, that you'll have more access to smaller fishing villages and so on that aren't normally served by even some of the bus companies, for example. And Monchique actually may be one place that could be served by some buses. But in general, you also, like I was saying, do have trains and buses, not just within towns, but also around the country and also internationally. But also you have buses that you can take from Spain to Portugal and Portugal to Spain, even from Braga, for example. If you want to go to a city called Vigo out on the ocean, it's about an hour and a half by bus. Or even within the country, you can take buses as well. There are a number of different bus operators in the country. And that's one thing that I will say can get a little bit more confusing in comparison to trains, because unlike some other countries in Europe, Portugal really just has one mainline train company. Within that train company, there are a few different types of services. You have regional, high speed, and urban trains. The high speed trains are called Alfa Pendular. And that's actually the type of train that I am on here. And it's called an Alfa Pendular because think of the word pendular in English, like something that would swing from side to side. This train actually will tilt significantly while you're on it, just so that it can keep up some speed while going around tight corners. Well, not that tight, but tight for a train. The train's top speed is supposed to reach 220 kilometers per hour, which is 136.7 freedom units per hour. So that's pretty darn fast, I would say. It's not that bad, but I will say it can get a little bumpy. And then you do sometimes feel like you're on a little bit of an amusement park ride when it's starting to tilt and twist and turn. It's a unique experience, I will say that much. I'll definitely say make sure you have a solid meal before you get on there. But one thing that's really cool about these trains is that they do have not necessarily a dining cart, but a cafe cart where you can actually go and get some food. I know that if you're in the first class, they do have a service that comes by and that will actually bring food to you. I believe also in the second class, they do have that as well. I'm just not 1,000% sure about that. And the difference between the cost of the ticket is not that significant in the end. Of course, depending on what ticket from where to where that you're actually going to be purchasing. Just as an example, the second class ticket from Braga to Lisbon would be 38 euros, where the first class ticket would be 48. So, of course, yes, 10 euros is a good chunk of change, but with the exchange rate right now, it's not that bad in comparison to how it used to be if you're spending dollars here. But getting back to the service while you're at your seat, the prices that they have are actually not that bad. Is it the highest quality food? No, but they have sandwiches, ham and cheese and bacon, tuna, on like a regular roll or on a croissant. They don't always have everything, so keep that in mind, that your options may be limited, or sometimes you may actually get lucky and have a lot of options there. If you do go up to the cafe cart, though, they do sometimes have a couple of hot options, but it's really just microwave ready meals. So nothing super crazy special, but not the worst. I ended up getting a lasagna while I was on board. I can't say that I really enjoyed it, but it was food. It did its job. But on the way back, I got a sandwich, the ham and cheese sandwich, plus a slice of chocolate salami, plus some Maltesers, plus an iced tea. Came to, I want to say, about $6.40, $6.50. I'll put it on the screen if you're watching this on YouTube so that you can see kind of what I got and what the price was. And so I would say, actually, that's not a horrible price. Like, I could say maybe if I went to a cafe in some places, like in a very touristy place, I would pay more than that. In a place like Braga, that would probably be pretty close to on par. Maybe I'd pay like €1 less. But at a more touristy location, yeah, that would actually be quite fair. I've been in other places where I would have expected to maybe pay 12 euros for the same amount of food. So I would say it is reasonable. And before we get into the next section, I just wanted to say a quick thanks to those of you who are subscribed and who have hit the bell on YouTube and the likes. And also thanks to those of you who are subscribed on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify and have rated it 5 stars. That really does help the project. Also, if you're wanting to see a little bit more of some of the things that maybe I haven't shown here on YouTube, be sure to follow me on Instagram. Anyway, let's get back into this. But getting back to the buses, like I was talking about before, there are a few different bus companies here, some that are more international, some that are more domestic. Some bus companies offer the same route, but just starting at different locations. And that's one thing that you may want to keep in mind, is that you do have train stations and bus stations, but the bus stations and the train stations aren't necessarily the same place. Some train stations do, however, have buses that go there, but the main bus station itself will be a separate place in probably a different part of town. Even in Braga, for example, the train station, the main train station here, is very separate from the bus station. They're in 2 different parts of the city, walkable from one to the other. However, they're very, very separate. However, in Lisbon, you have 2 main stations for trains. And at the station called Orient, you do have some buses that go there. For example, Flixbus is one option. Flixbus will be something that maybe some of you who've traveled around Europe may have heard of before. They are usually on the cheaper side, but you really have to compare, because even I've compared them to some of the bus companies from Portugal or from Portugal to Spain. And sometimes they can be right on par as some of the mainline companies, but you have to go to a location that's a little less convenient. But I've also seen prices that do cost a little bit more, but it depends on where you are. If you go to a train station in Lisbon called Santa Apolónia, then you will not have those buses there, and you would need to go either back to Orient, or you have to go to the Jardim Zoológico, the zoo, like very close to the zoo. There is a bus station over there where you have buses that go all over the country, as well as, again, international. So if you're not pre-purchasing your ticket, I would say probably going to the bus station may be one of the better options, because you'll be able to go there and actually talk to somebody behind a window. Flixbus may or may not have somebody working there. That's something you have to consider. And on some of those buses, you would be able to buy the ticket on board. Some of them you might not. And even there are some third-party services out there where I have heard of people buying their tickets, not just from Flix, for example, but other companies. And those people have run into the situation where the bus driver didn't accept the digital ticket because they didn't recognize it, and they didn't know that it was actually supposed to be fine, that even the bus company accepts it. So you're kind of at the discretion of the bus driver to an extent. So that's why I would personally prefer to go buy it at the place where you're supposed to purchase it from. And there you'll be able to find out about times and this and that and the other. You can buy it a day ahead, or you can buy it the day of. Definitely leave a little bit of time before your bus just to make sure that you do have the ticket and that you can get on. But does it really matter like which bus company that you go with? Not necessarily. Some places they'll offer locations that others don't. Sometimes you can compare and contrast, and you can look at some of these things online. And I will try to put whatever links that I can in the description of this video on YouTube, or at the very least in the first pinned comment. So be sure to look there if you are listening to this as an audio only podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any other podcasting platform that you may be listening to this through. And of course, also while we're on the topic of tickets, you can buy the train tickets either at the station, or you can actually go to a number of different travel agents around the country. Sometimes you'll have many within the same city that you'll be able to buy tickets from, and you'll even be able to buy the same ticket at the same price that you may be able to purchase it at the station itself. So sometimes this can be nice because sometimes at the station you may not find somebody who speaks English behind the counter, but at a travel agency, maybe you can. Again, it's just another option. These are things that you may want to take into consideration when you are going to make your purchase, because they may be able to help you to make the arrangements not only for the train, but also say for a hotel on the other end if necessary. Then, of course, we have to talk about local travel. This will differ from city to city and how their system runs. Of course, even with some of the other things like buses, for example, running between locations, it can be less expensive if you buy a round trip ticket or prepay. Definitely with local transportation, you will end up saving some cash. Even if I wanted to take the train from Braga to Porto, it can end up being a little bit less if you buy the round trip ticket. Even going from Braga to Porto, if I'm not mistaken, they do offer a little bit of a discount there for round trip. But if you're going to a place like Lisbon, for example, you have a lot of different options for getting around the town. You have the metro, you have the tram, and you have buses. And then also you have some funiculars that go throughout the city. In Lisbon, you do actually have some tickets that you can get for 24 hours or 72 hours. And some of those can actually be really worthwhile. For example, if you find that in the space of 24 hours that you'll be taking at least 4 metros or 4 trams or 4 buses or any combination of them, a 24-hour pass could be worthwhile. And that's something like 6 something. But if you find that you want to go to a place like Cascais, then a round trip ticket to go there plus the cost of the rechargeable ticket itself would be €5. But if you buy the 24-hour ticket, then I think it's like 11 or 12. And so if you start really comparing and contrasting that, you're finding that you're going to take 4 metros or trams or whatever, plus a round trip ticket to Cascais, then it can really be worth it. And for tickets on like the metro or whatever, we're only talking about 2 round trips here. Like that's not that bad. So for example, like you go from the train station to your hotel, that's 1. The hotel to the restaurant, that's 2. And then back to the hotel, that's 3. And then over to the station to get the train to go to Cascais, that's 4. So you have to start thinking about it like that. They do have options, for example, where you can prepay and recharge. And normally say if the ticket would be like say $150, the ticket I believe comes down in price to $120 or $130 per ride, and you can just recharge that way. So you do have various options. And then among these 24 and 72 hour tickets, you do have tickets that will take you across the river from Lisbon. So you have a lot of options for things that you can do and see at a better price than what you might spend otherwise. Of course, you'll have things like Uber and Bolt and other options. Even in Braga, for example, if you pre-purchase your tickets on the bus, you would pay like 70 cents, 75 cents instead of $150, $155 per ticket. So there can be a savings there. Of course, it's a rechargeable ticket that you have to do, and you do it per ticket. Whereas in Lisbon, it would be like by the euro amount, for example, like say €3, €5, €10, and so on. But also in Lisbon, you do have passes that will include, say, museums and discounts at different stores and things. So anyway, these are all things to keep in mind when you're in Portugal and you're getting around. Some of these things may be unique to some places. Some of these things may apply to everywhere. You just will have to get a little bit of an idea. Getting around also by Uber or taxi, I would say, is generally quite reasonable. The prices may vary significantly between locations. And then also, depending on how much demand there is, you may have the experience that prices would double or triple. Or if you're in a larger city, for example, getting one of these apps where you just order it on your phone, you may have a faster time because it's a bigger city, or you may have to wait because there are so many people who are ordering. And actually, I spoke to a driver very recently who told me that generally speaking, that Uber is what the tourists use. And so on Uber, you may actually end up having to wait a little bit longer, but Bolt is something that it seems as though more locals use. And if you're in a larger city, you may have a little bit of an easier time to actually get a Bolt than an Uber. I can say I had that experience where I was ordering an Uber and it said 20 minutes, but then I switched over to Bolt and it said 3 minutes. So I switched and canceled the ride. Anyway, thank you all so much for joining me for this very special episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Of course, a huge thank you to those of you who helped to make these episodes possible through rafaeldifuria.com/Patreon, patreon.com/rafaeldifuria. The monthly help to keep this project rolling really does make a huge difference. Of course, the one-time donations as well through the thanks button on YouTube, as well as rafaeldifuria.com/support. Of course, as always, I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I will see you all next time. Later.